Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 6 of the Wolfram Student Podcast. I'm Sam,
And I'm Rashang.
and we're your hosts.
This is the Wolfram Student Podcast, where every fortnight we dive into a new, innovative project done by high schoolers using the Wolfram language.
For this episode, let's welcome Sameer, who will be discussing his Wolfram project on generating Pac-Man levels from street maps. Hi, Sameer.
Hello, um, my name is Sameer, and I'm a junior in high school. I'm from Texas, and I went to the Wolfram High School Summer Research Program of 2023.
Yeah. Um, okay, well, I guess you already mentioned what camp you've gone to. Um, any thoughts about how camp was run this year? Did you like it? What did you learn in your project? I don't know, just thoughts about Wolfram.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fun. There's like a lot of mentors and TAs, and like a lot of people helping out. We do a lot of great activities, and it was pretty good to get to know other people and also just learn about the Wolfram language and work on the project.
Yeah, sounds cool. Um, yeah, I'm excited to see your project too, since I was mostly your TA for this one. Um, and I guess just a fun question that we ask everyone who comes on. What's your favorite Wolfram function?
I think my favorite Wolfram function would probably be the which function because it's pretty convenient and like lets you do just a lot of if statements in like one line kind of.
Okay. Just for context, which is essentially multiple ifs strung together where you go which, case one, case two, result two. Um, so yeah, pretty cool. I don't think anyone's ever said which. They normally go for table or something, which is definitely
Yeah,
cool.
that's true.
Okay, cool. So let's get straight into your project. Can you first give us like a quick summary on what it's about?
So for my project, I kind of created a game of Pac-Man that would be played on street reps, and I want to make it a fully playable game. I wanted to have it actively, the Pac-Man actually move around on the street map, and so that's kind of what I made. And then I also have some extra game features included too.
Okay, pretty cool. I guess just take us through it then.
To kind of just an introduction, just Pac-Man, I think basically everyone would know how it's what the game is because it's pretty popular. It's on many arcade machines, and there's many different versions of it with many different types of games. But for this version, I decided to use something called OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap is this public database, and it has a bunch of information about different streets, about different traffic lights and fire hydrants and random stuff on these streets, and it's collected through volunteers and other sources. And it's pretty good for individuals or companies or really anyone. And to import data, there's a couple different methods. One, you could import data from these XML files. So here I imported data from a file that was stored on the cloud. Another option is to kind of take these specific latitude and longitude coordinates of this bounding box and then import that into the research function from Wolfram. And this will make it kind of easy just to get a general area and get the data of that area. And then finally, there's a way to use an API, and this allows you to use queries to access large amounts of data. So I ended up using these latitude longitude coordinates. And here's an example of some data where it kind of shows the position and it shows a geoposition with these specific coordinates. And then also has some tags. There's no tags in this scenario, but in many other scenarios, there'll be tags describing what the object is or how you can identify it. So after putting the data, I use this thing called Geographics, and this allows you to visualize the data on a map, and you can kind of see the street names. You can just see the general map with other features. So here I put lines on all these roads that were kind of like highways or just general street roads or residential roads or really any kind of road in the area. So after doing this, I started to work on movement because a lot of Pac-Man is about the movement. So Pac-Man was on a grid in normal Pac-Man, where it's kind of like this, where you can just move up and down, all those continuous movement, kind of like this. So I made a quick version of that. But since my map is in
Um,
a different
wait,
form,
sorry, one question.
yes.
How are you, I guess just in context for listeners, how are you able to Like normally you'd have to continuously run line of code every time you wanted like it to move one place. How are you able to control it moving just with the arrow keys like in that code block?
Yeah, a good question. So what I used was a combination of two different functions. So I used DynamicModule and Event Handler. DynamicModule allows you to continuously take in dynamic events and update variables and do just a bunch of stuff dynamically based on user input. And Event Handler allows you to actually take in user input. So you could take in stuff like key clicks, or which are up arrow key down, down arrow key, and all the arrow keys, or mouse clicks or space bars or really anything. And this combination allowed me to generate this visual of like a circle and moving around with the key clicks.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So moving on, I want to kind of do some visualization. So I first visualized my map as just lines. So I kind of got rid of the map part of it. And this is just the graphics of those lines visualized out here. And one thing I wanted to try doing for movement, because I realized that these lines aren't perfectly straight. So I had to have some way to move diagonally. So I used vectors, and this normalize function allowed me to update the position of a dynamic object in a dynamic module every frame with the vector. So here, upon click, it just moves to a random point with the vector, so it moves diagonally to that point. So this was basic movement. And then another thing I wanted to do was make sure that I can move to multiple points. So here it continuously finds new destinations and routes to those destinations. So it moves towards this point all the way over there, and then just goes towards the next point. And it keeps on kind of bouncing between those. So this allowed me to quickly just move between a bunch of points in series. And then for navigation, I realized that considering the fact that these lines wouldn't ever be perfect 90-degree angles, and the only real way to do proper navigation could be through clicking. So my idea would be the player would just click somewhere, and then the Pac-Man would kind of navigate towards that area. So it would use this nearest node. So first I had to generate nodes, and nodes are kind of like anything on a highway or anything on a road or just any important feature of a road or highway. And there's like going to be a decent bit of these within a small city area. And you can kind of use these to map out the roads. So the Pac-Man would navigate here to the node that was closest to the mouse position. So it would find the node that was nearest to where the mouse was positioned. So if I clicked here, it would move to a relatively close node. Like there, it could move to that node, or here. It would move all the way down to that node. But since I had to move from node to node to move across the lines, because there's a bunch of nodes on the lines, I would make a graph. This graph would have every single node. And what I could do was I could optimize a short path between the nodes, and that path would have to be along the lines because the nodes are located on the lines next to each other. So here's a graph of the nodes, and this red path right here is a bit tiny, but right here, this red path is the shortest path between the nodes. And what this ends up translating onto the lines is something that is directly on the lines. So even though it looks a bit weird on the graph, it looks proper on the lines. So if you look at this movement function here, when I click onto any location, the Pac-Man finds the shortest path from its current node to the nearest node to where it's clicked, and then moves to that location. So that's kind of how I combine this graph and the list movements and the mouse position graphics. And to make this movement a tiny bit better, because one flaw is that I couldn't reroute on a path, I made a few functions. So I made a helper function just for basic navigation. I also made one for rerouting, because rerouting would let me take from any location along this path and easily switch to a new location. So I made this movement final function, which meant I could reroute along a path at any time. And this was kind of the basis for Pac-Man's movement. So the player would want to go to a location and they could just click to that location and Pac-Man would start navigating to that area.
Okay, yeah, that looks really cool.
Yeah. So from there, this was a pretty big part of my project, and then there I kind of switched over to the extra features part of it, and these were kind of the ghosts, the pellets, and stuff like that. So the ghosts, I add them directly onto the movement function. So these ghosts were using a similar movement style, but they mainly had to base themselves off of Pac-Man's position because they were trying to find Pac-Man's position and navigate towards that position. So there are four different ghosts in Pac-Man. The first ghost is Blinky. That is the red ghost. So if you ever notice the red ghost is chasing Pac-Man around, it's always trying to follow Pac-Man directly. And it sometimes gets confused, but usually it's just going directly for Pac-Man. So this was simple, as I just made it so it rerouted towards Pac-Man's position. Then there's Pinky, and Pinky is like an ambusher. So it tries to navigate a tiny bit ahead of Pac-Man. So it'll go to. So for me, I made Pinky go towards Pac-Man's final destination. So where the mouse was clicked. So Pinky gets to the destination before Pac-Man does, and Pinky can catch Pac-Man. Then there's Inky. Inky is the blue ghost, and it's a bit unusual because it uses both Pac-Man and Blinky. So I used a random area next to the destination so I could catch Pac-Man off guard. So it would do something similar to the pink ghost, but it go a bit away from where Pac-Man was going, but close to that area. And finally, Orange Ghost, which was Clyde, is the stupid ghost who runs to random locations near Pac-Man, and just goes to random areas. So I've navigated Clyde to random nodes. So here's kind of full block of code for Ghost. It doesn't run here, it has to run the main function, but it's kind of just how the Ghost functions worked.
Could you explain just the logic behind that function?
All right. Yeah, sure. So first the RGB color it gives the color orange, and it's contained in a dynamic object. So the position is updated by a set of conditions. So first, if the ghost can move, then and it's away from its current destination, then it'll move towards the destination using a similar movement function to Pac-Man. And then if it gets to that position, it'll switch to the next destination. But if it's already at its final destination, it'll have to reroute towards another random node. So this is for the orange ghost. The other ones would use their specific code, but in the case of the orange ghost, it just reroutes to the next random node whenever it reaches its final destination.
Well, thank you.
So, and then there's one last thing to do, which was some interactions with Pac-Man, because I always had to reset the ghost position. So if Pac-Man was ever hit, I had a reset function, a reset command that I would run just to make every single Pac-Man go back to their location. Then there's some additional game features. And so one is scoring system. So scoring system is usually handled by pellets and power pellets. Pellets are those tiny yellow dots that you see placed around everywhere, and those just give you simple score if you run over them. However, power pellets are different because power pellets can make you turn big or sometimes just turn a different color, and you can eat the ghosts, and that gives you some points too. So for the pellets, I chose a amount of nodes, about 2/3 of them, I think, and I just chose them all as pellets. And I put small, just tiny discs down at each of their locations. And if Pac-Man hit a pellet, his score got updated, and that pellet was deleted. For eating ghosts, I made the power pellets as 7 of the pellets. So a random 7 where the pellet of the pellets became power pellets. And I displayed them, and if Pac-Man hit a power pellet, he got this ability called Power Mode. And during Power Mode, he could always eat the ghosts instead of the ghosts eating Pac-Man. And the power pellets would also disappear if Pac-Man hit him. And then I also made a function which ghost just to check to see which ghost Pac-Man hit whenever it hit a ghost. So this is kind of like the full code to check for Pac-Man and ghost interaction. Again, it doesn't run because it's part of the bigger function, but yeah, so it just checks if it interacts and then it updates positions and for everything. Power mode also has to decay a bit because it'd be overpowered, so it over time it slowly becomes less, so that it runs out and Pac-Man has to use the power pellets to get it back again. I also had just a small display in the top right, and that would just help me show the score, the lives, just so the player can kind of see how the game's going. And finally, there's win and lose conditions. So if there were no pellets left, then Pac-Man wins, so the round's over. But if they lost all their lives, they lose, and the round's over. Yeah, so here's my final game code, and this kind of compiles everything from beforehand, all the ghost functions and the Pac-Man functions. So it's called level, the function I made, and it starts with a dynamic module. This kind of declares a lot of the variables, such as like the destinations, the positions, and some of the other stuff like lives and power pellets. Then I also use a lot of the helper functions I made, such as generating nodes, lines, pellets, and the graphical. That would kind of help out with movement and some other parts of the game. Then there's the event handler to handle all the inputs and a geographics. So the geographics is going to make the entire thing appear on a map and take place on the map itself. So in the geographics, to start out with some stuff like the display inset and some stuff for the Pac-Man. So here's the full Pac-Man part, starting from the dynamic all the way here, and includes a lot of those functions kind of to do to calculate the position, to see what's happening in the game right now, and to update some of the ghost positions, to the score, and updates like a lot of stuff. So the Hackman's kind of like a big part of it, that dynamic object. There's also the ghost functions. So here's the one for red, for pink, and they all follow like a similar template mostly. The one that was shown above. They check, they make sure that the round's not over. They make sure that they're they check if they're hitting Pac-Man, and they have a reset function for that. They also check if they're at a destination so that we can reroute. And there's a lot of stuff going on in that way. So there's the four ghost functions, and then the end of the event handler, which shows the all the inputs and stuff like that. So here's the full game. It's on community, so it's not exactly playable here. So I'd have to open the Wolfram notebook, but here is what it kind of looks like.
Yeah, it looks really cool. And having seen your game run, it is definitely very fun to play.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I guess just reflecting on your project, what part of this entire process do you think was your favorite part?
I think one of my favorite parts was kind of working with like the movement stuff and just getting the develop movement because I got to figure out like how to do it in that way. I got to slowly iterate from something simply like just moving to a point to actually moving around the lines and towards like the destination. So that was kind of fun.
Cool. And what do you think was the most difficult part?
I think the most difficult part was working with DynamicModule. It was really tedious and just annoying to have to work with it because it prevented me from adding some functionality to my game and to kind of separate out my code into more helpful functions. And it also was extremely laggy and it caused a lot of crashes and slowed me down a lot when making my code.
Yeah, that makes sense. Dynamic stuff and manipulates are always hard to work with in Wolfram.
Yeah.
And then do you have any like future plans for this project that you want to expand on?
One thing I think I could expand on, like a simple thing kind of, is just adding more cities. So near the end, I kind of started like adding some, when I made the full level function, I had it playable just by entering some geographic coordinates. So what I could do is I can make it easier to select these geographic coordinates, and I could have it so that a player can just quickly select a coordinate, such as right now I have Brooklyn and Shanghai, but I could try adding more cities in there, or I could make some way for it to auto detect the latitude, longitude, just based on any city or any location. Obviously, that would be more difficult, but there are some options there.
Yeah, that sounds like it'd be really cool. Cool. So now that you've done like this entire project and you've had some experience with the Wolfram language, um, do you have any like final thoughts about it? Are you more inclined to use it over like for what kinds of coding projects? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think like one thought I've kind of realized about the Wolfram language compared to, especially compared to like other languages I've used, like I've used like Python in the past a decent bit, and like I kind of noticed that it's a lot more like this like motto where it's like, oh, there's a function for that. So you see like you need to do this really complex, specific, um, vague thing, and there just happens to be like a function. So it's like it's very useful in so many different fields. It's like biology, chemistry, ec economics, physics. There's like a bunch of specific applications and it has functions for really everything. There's just a bunch of random tools. There's a bunch of ways to do everything. While in other languages, it's kind of like you kind of have these some small tools, but you use these tools a lot and you kind of use them in weird ways to get what you want, kind of.
Yeah, I can see that. And then beyond your own project, are there any other like things you'd like to do with Wolfram? Either like, I don't know if you're in Whelp right now, or maybe coming back to the summer program next year. Any other projects you're interested in?
Yeah, so I am doing well right now. I'm going to be doing that project, and then I think in the future, sometimes if ever I want to work on something kind of with like data analysis and something that has to do like some kind of project like that, where it require like using these like simpler functions and all, I think I'd reuse Wolfram or like I'd turn to that as an option rather than other coding languages because I think it is like convenient in that way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your project. This was really cool to see your Pac-Man function. And yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mhm.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wolfram Student Podcast. We hope you learned something new and took away insights from today's discussion. If you want to be featured in a future episode, fill out the form at tinyurl.com/WSP-S2-interest.
And be sure to tune back in 2 weeks' time to hear our next episode. Once again, thanks for listening to this episode of the Wolfram Student Podcast.